You are not welcome at the funeral, Cordelia. You are far too emotional, and we require dignity for Robert's final send-off. My sister, Vivian, delivered the verdict over the phone in that crisp, detached tone she reserves for closing legal motions. The sound of heavy rain outside my Seattle apartment seemed to mirror the cold, empty shock in my chest. My father, Robert Sterling, had passed away 3 days prior, and this was my official exclusion. The accusation was familiar, but the stakes were tragically new, casting a final public shame over my relationship with the man who had given me life but denied me warmth. My name is Cordelia Sterling. I'm 36 years old, and I am a licensed therapist and trauma specialist, currently running a small but busy private practice focused on healing the deep, unseen wounds people carry. My profession, which deals explicitly with emotion and vulnerability, is, ironically, the singular reason my family has deemed me a liability. The Sterlings live by the credo of cold, calculated control, believing vulnerability to be the gravest form of weakness. My sister, Vivian, 39, is the chief operating officer of my father's massive real estate empire, Sterling & Sons. She is the epitome of the family's values, perfectly tailored, ruthlessly pragmatic, and utterly incapable of showing genuine grief, which they equate with weakness. She, along with my mother, Penelope, and my younger brother, Julian, a junior partner in the firm, had spent 2 decades minimizing my life and my career, dismissing therapy as fringe psychology, and my empathy as a crippling lack of commercial instinct. This cold dismissal was woven into the very fabric of our lives, extending back to my earliest memories, where a scraped knee earned a lecture on stoicism, not a hug. The exclusion wasn't a sudden fit of anger. It was the final vicious crescendo of years of calculated emotional distance. Growing up in the sterile marble confines of the Sterling family's mansion, where the only thing warmer than the conversation was the imported granite. Vivian was praised for her aggressive negotiating style, and Julian for his quick grasp of financial leverage. I was simply the sensitive one, the child who would retreat to the library to read philosophy while they discussed quarterly earnings. My decision to pursue psychology was met with scorn that bordered on disgust. You're running off to feel things for strangers. My mother once scoffed over a Thanksgiving dinner that felt more like a shareholder meeting, instead of building a legacy for your family. I learned quickly that the depth of my feeling was a perceived flaw, a sign that I didn't possess the necessary sterling steel needed to conquer the world, or even manage a conversation about property taxes. When my father was diagnosed with a sudden, aggressive form of cancer a few months ago, I was kept at arm's length, my sincere attempts to visit and offer comfort deflected by Vivian, who insisted Dad required efficient management of his affairs, not theatrical emotional outbursts. I wasn't just shut out of his room. I was shut out of his final reality, denied the simple human connection that I knew, as a therapist, was vital for both the dying and the grieving. The day he died, I received the news via a cold, 2-sentence email from Julian, appended with the funeral schedule and a note about appropriate attire. Now, as the family prepared for the funeral, a massive, public spectacle at the most prestigious cathedral, followed by a reception at the exclusive Seattle Country Club, all meticulously designed to reinforce the Sterling brand of impenetrable wealth and stoic resilience, they drew the final boundary. "We need this to be flawless, Cordelia," Vivian had hissed, her voice cutting through the speakerphone like glass. "The eulogy is about Dad's legacy, his financial and civic accomplishments, the things that truly mattered to him. We can't have you weeping dramatically in the front row, attracting unnecessary attention and making people uncomfortable. You simply can't be trusted to maintain the appropriate emotional standard. Stay home." The sheer magnitude of their judgment, delivered on the heels of my deepest personal loss, was staggering. I didn't just feel rejected. I felt like they were trying to erase the very memory of my existence from my father's life, demanding that his final moments be a performance of their unwavering control. I hung up the phone, not in anger, but in a profound, devastating realization. They valued their public image more than their own flesh and blood, even in death. This realization did not bring tears, but a cold, focused clarity. The funeral was scheduled for the following afternoon. I paced my apartment, the floorboards of my comfortable, unpretentious home, creaking softly beneath my feet, a stark contrast to the hollow echo of the Sterling mansion's marble halls. I was consumed by a desperate, quiet need to acknowledge my father, not the ruthless CEO who had built a cold empire, but the quiet, awkward man who, years ago, had secretly slipped me a worn copy of the Stoic philosophers before sending me off to college, an almost apologetic gesture from a man trapped by his own legacy. The pain of being denied a final goodbye was unbearable, but the very act of fighting them, of showing up and demanding my right to grieve, would simply confirm their hateful narrative of my instability. I realized I needed more than just a place in the front row. I needed to prove, for the final time, that my emotional acuity was not a weakness. It was a formidable strength, a weapon capable of dismantling their controlled performance. I knew they would be expecting me to either show up in tears and be escorted out, confirming their pathology, or to simply disappear and prove my own irrelevance. I chose a third, far more dangerous path. I picked up my phone and called my colleague, Ms. Eleanor Vance. Eleanor, though not related to my family, was a titan in her field, a 65-year-old retired corporate defense attorney who now dedicated her vast expertise to ethical consulting, known for her ice-cold demeanor, a reputation for destroying opponents in court, and an unparalleled ability to command respect in any room, especially one filled with people like the Sterlings. "Eleanor," I said, my voice steady, strength to feel, and the wisdom to embrace what cannot be leveraged or controlled. "This is my true final asset." The effect was instantaneous. The sheer, naked, authentic emotion of the letter, read in a room dedicated to corporate sterility, broke the perfect composure of the assembled crowd. Several high-profile guests, recognizing the profound truth in his final words, began to weep openly. Vivian finally exploded, her control shattered and her fury boiling over the emotional landscape. "This is inappropriate. This is a fabrication!" She has no right to read sentimental nonsense at a service for the CEO of Sterling & Sons, she hissed, rushing toward the pulpit steps. Eleanor didn't flinch. She simply held up her hand, silencing Vivian with a cold look that contained decades of crushing legal experience. "Vivian Sterling," Eleanor stated, looking directly at the live camera feed they had set up for the service, ensuring her words were recorded. "Cordelia Sterling is not here because you deemed her too emotional. She is here through me to inform you that Robert Sterling's personal will, executed 3 weeks ago, contained a final codicil that reflects this very message." The cathedral went utterly silent again, the kind of stillness that precedes complete disaster and financial ruin. Eleanor, with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor unveiling the key evidence, pulled a fresh, sealed document from her jacket pocket. The real shock, the one they never anticipated. Mr. Sterling, in his final act, established the Sterling Legacy Foundation, endowed with his controlling interest in Sterling & Sons, 51% of the firm's total equity. Vivian stared, paralyzed in disbelief. Julian, realizing the immense financial implications, dropped his perfectly groomed head into his hands. My mother let out a small, strangled, almost soundless cry that spoke volumes of their social and monetary catastrophe. The head of this foundation, tasked with transitioning Sterling & Sons away from purely exploitative development and toward ethical, sustainable, and community-centric investments, is named in the document, Eleanor announced, allowing a painful pause for the magnitude of the revelation to sink in, destroying all hope. The sole, appointed executive and non-removable chair of the Sterling Legacy Foundation, with the controlling vote over all major board decisions, is Cordelia Sterling. Vivian staggered backward, her expensive suit looking suddenly cheap and hollow under the unforgiving lights. "That's impossible! I'm the COO! The company is mine! I have the experience!" she screamed, her voice breaking on a note of raw, desperate entitlement. Eleanor, calm and unyielding, delivered the final, crushing blow. The codicil includes a clause stating that given her demonstrated integrity, ethical focus, and her ability to handle and understand complex human needs, the strength to feel, as your father put it, Cordelia is uniquely qualified to steer the firm into its final, most meaningful chapter. You refused to let her attend because she was too emotional. You had no idea that her empathy, the quality you spent 30 years mocking, had just given her controlling interest in your entire empire. Eleanor stepped away from the podium, leaving the Sterlings exposed, paralyzed, and financially ruined by the very daughter they scorned. She didn't wait for the ensuing chaos, simply turned, walked directly past the stunned family, and exited the cathedral. In the ensuing weeks, the fallout was catastrophic. The Sterling and Sons board, faced with the overwhelming public perception created by the widely shared funeral footage and the ethical demands of the new majority shareholder, capitulated instantly. Cordelia Sterling, the sensitive one, became the non-removable chair of the Sterling Legacy Foundation, and by extension, the boss of her entire family. Vivian, Julian, and Penelope launched a furious, desperate legal challenge, claiming undue influence, but Eleanor Vance, using the viral footage of Vivian's outburst and the emotional contents of Robert's letter as key evidence, annihilated their motion. The final legal filing was so comprehensive and devastating that it not only dismissed their case, but levied punitive fees against them for frivolous litigation. Cordelia, true to her nature, did not fire her family immediately. Instead, she announced a comprehensive 3-year corporate restructuring led by outside experts and focused on transitioning the firm's portfolio. Vivian and Julian, forced to report to their too-emotional sister, found themselves trapped in a world they couldn't control. Vivian's ruthless pragmatism was useless against Cordelia's ethical leverage. Julian's financial brilliance was now subservient to Cordelia's mandate for community benefit. Their prestige, which had always rested on the firm's power, collapsed as their peers realized they were now puppets in a new, uncomfortable ethical drama. Julian quickly resigned, unable to reconcile the humiliation with his inflated sense of self-worth. Vivian stayed, her fury a slow, simmering poison, but every move she made was meticulously monitored and countered by Cordelia's new ethical compliance team. Penelope, the mother who had prioritized image over her daughter's well-being, found her social circle rapidly diminishing. Her friends, who had praised the Sterling's dignity, recoiled from the public spectacle of their greed and the revelation of their emotional cruelty toward Cordelia. The true price they paid was not financial. It was the loss of the social standing they valued most. Cordelia, meanwhile, thrived. She used her training not just to manage her practice, but to restructure the corporate culture of Sterling and Sons, applying trauma-informed principles to employee relations, promoting sustainable development, and creating a genuine legacy of empathy where before there had only been profit. She finally mourned her father, not the cold executive, but the conflicted man who, in his final act, had validated her life's work. Cordelia never attended the reception, never spoke to her family again outside of corporate necessity, and never once raised her voice in anger. She achieved her victory with silence and the surgical precision of an ethical mandate, proving that the strength to feel was, in fact, the greatest asset of all. She used to think she needed her family's permission to grieve or their approval to succeed. It turned out, she just needed to understand that her greatest strength, her capacity for deep, uncompromising empathy, was her ultimate form of leverage. They chose superficiality and control. She chose authenticity and truth, and in the end, truth inherited the empire. The only eulogy they heard was the sound of their own silence. She had the truth, and she had the controlling vote. Focused by the depth of my resolve, I need a favor. I need a proxy to attend my father's funeral. I need you to go in my place, and I need you to deliver the eulogy. I explained the situation, the history, the absolute public refusal of my right to mourn. Eleanor listened, her silence profound, not the absence of sound, but the sound of pure, unadulterated thought. Eleanor listened to my full story, the exclusion, the cruel reason, the sheer breathtaking audacity of my family's control. She listened not with pity, which I would have rejected, but with a professional, calculating gleam in her voice. "Cordelia," she replied, "I understand the mission. They want a flawless performance. I will give them one. I will be your shield, and I will be their consequence. They have committed an ethical and social breach of contract. We must respond with overwhelming force." Then, she asked the critical question, the pivot point of my entire plan. "Now, about that eulogy. Does your father's will happen to have a final clause they might be unaware of?" My heart leapt. In the quiet months leading up to his death, my father had contacted me, not for psychological help, but for something far more complex. He asked me to review a document, not a standard legal will, but a draft of a new ethical mandate he planned to leave for the firm, one that Vivian had mocked as Robert's sentimental hobby. He had been wrestling with the coldness of his own legacy, confessing a fear that he had built a monument to greed, not humanity. I told Eleanor about the mandate, about his final, fragile realization that the world had changed, and Sterling & Sons needed a soul. Eleanor paused, then instructed, "Have your grief. I will handle the performance. All you need to do is prepare the script for their realization." In the hours that followed, I worked not as a grieving daughter, but as a strategist and a translator, distilling my father's final ethical struggle into Eleanor's precise, authoritative legal language. I provided Eleanor with the evidence of my father's true regret, not bank statements, but a hidden journal entry about the hollow victory of a recent land acquisition and a series of cryptic coded notes about the future of the firm's leadership. I knew my father, the Stoic, had created an emotional safety valve for his estate, a final, unassailable gesture designed to undo the damage he had done. Eleanor confirmed the financial facts. 51% of Sterling & Sons' non-transferable equity was tied up in a private foundation, which she knew my father had secretly executed before the illness took full control. She discovered that Vivian, in her arrogance, had disregarded the existence of this entity, viewing it as a minor tax loophole, never realizing it was the controlling interest. Eleanor's legal team spent the evening confirming the codicil's specific, intentional language. The future of Sterling & Sons was to be decided by an ethical board, and only one person in the family met the specific criteria of integrity, empathy, and community focus. The entire framework was a mirror image of everything my family stood against. The next day, as the hearse arrived at the cathedral, I sat alone in my sunlit living room, dressed in simple gray, watching the live stream of the service, ignoring the frantic, accusatory text messages from Julian asking if I was really going to be this petty. The cathedral was a sea of black Dior and custom Italian suits, a high society spectacle designed to project power. The service was exactly as I predicted, a glossy, sterile celebration of corporate achievement. My mother, Penelope, looked impeccable, a statue of refined sorrow. Julian gave a stiff, formal reading about civic duty, and Vivian delivered the primary eulogy, a dry recitation of revenue growth, acquisition targets, and the firm's stock performance, all emphasizing her role as the chosen successor, the flawless heir. It was a memorial service to the balance sheet, not to a father. Then the official program concluded, and the minister, looking slightly confused and pale, announced, "We now welcome Ms. Cordelia Sterling's representative, Ms. Eleanor Vance, who will share a final reflection on Mr. Sterling's personal legacy." A collective gasp, sharp and visceral, went through the chapel. My mother's head snapped up, her expression transforming from detached grief to immediate confused alarm. Vivian's mouth opened, her composure cracking for the first time as she recognized the name of the formidable attorney. They hadn't invited me, the daughter, but here was an unexpected, unimpeachable guest, a corporate titan they all knew and instantly respected, stepping to the podium on my behalf. Eleanor, wearing a powerful, deep charcoal suit that radiated authority and cold precision, approached the pulpit. Her presence was magnetic, drawing every eye and silencing the nervous murmurs. She spoke not to the family, but to the assembled dignitaries, her voice low, measured, and utterly devoid of the emotional chaos they feared from me. "I stand here today as the proxy for Cordelia Sterling, Robert Sterling's only daughter who actually understood his humanity." The line, delivered with perfect legal weight, was a quiet, devastating bomb. Vivian, instantly livid, started to rise, but my mother placed a rigid, restraining hand on her arm, her eyes fixed on Eleanor with dawning horror. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining the unstoppable authority of a closing argument. "The Sterling family asked for dignity and a celebration of legacy. Cordelia instructed me to provide both, but to clarify what the true, personal legacy actually is." Eleanor then produced a folded, fragile document, not the will, which they thought they knew, but a final, deeply personal, handwritten letter from my father, which he had mailed to Eleanor in a secured lockbox just days before his death. She read it aloud, detailing his struggle with the moral emptiness of his own life, his regret at never fully understanding my career, and a deep, unexpected apology for the years of emotional neglect. It was intensely personal, heartbreakingly vulnerable, and utterly exposed the family's carefully manufactured facade of perfection. The eulogy culminated not in a financial achievement, but in a final emotional plea, echoing the stoic sentiment he'd once tried to impart to me. I leave my children my greatest wish,